Good morning. Welcome to Writers Chat, where craft connects community. We are so glad you're here with us today, whether you are here with us right now or whether you're watching the replay. We're doing something very different today. We're doing literary legacies of our founding fathers. So we're just going to be talking about some of the things that they wrote and the influences they might have had on us as writers. I'm Johnnie Alexander. I'm joined by Melissa Stroh, Brandy Brow, Norma Poore. Very glad to be here this morning, and we're just going to jump in and get started with Melissa and our first founding father. I should say that we're sort of getting a jump on next year because next year is oh my gosh, I forget what the word is because it's very long and clunky, but it's the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So we're starting that celebration a year early. Okay, Melissa, take it away.
And technically starting the 249th one a little early here too. So on that note, considering the very special document that we're celebrating,
Hmm.
in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impelled them to the separation.
No.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces the design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
Oh.
And that, folks, is the beginning of what is often considered the most infamous breakup letter in history.
Yes.
If you haven't guessed it already, I am talking about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is best known for his part in writing the Declaration of Independence, and he is certainly an example of a literary founder whose writing helped shape the face of literature today. He considered the Declaration of Independence one of his greatest life achievements. And as a diplomat, architect, scientist, and the third president of the United States, he also is known for many other noteworthy writings, which include his first inaugural address, Notes on the State of Virginia, more than 250 letters, some written to other founders of note, such as Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Patrick Henry, Thomas Paine, the Marquis de Lafayette, and James Madison, and his fragmentary autobiography written in 1821. Jefferson was extensively read. I don't know if you guys are aware of this history. His personal library of 10,000 volumes became the foundation for the Library of Congress. In
Wow.
fact, he donated that to them. And Congress also authorized Jefferson to name the first librarian of Congress. Okay, here, some more fun facts about Jefferson. The Library of Congress holds the collection of Thomas Jefferson's papers written from 1607 to 1827. These papers are held in the Library of Congress's manuscript division and consist of approximately 25,000 items. making it the largest collection of original Jefferson documents in the world. These date from the early 1760s through his death in 1826, and they mainly include his correspondences, but also his drafts of the Declaration of Independence, the drafts of Virginia laws, and his fragmentary autobiography, a small memorandum book that he used to record his spending, his many years' worth of daily weather recordings, charts, lists, tables, drawings, and recordings of his observations, both scientific and otherwise, notes, maps, recipes, ciphers, locks of hair, wool samples, and more. And speaking of ciphers, a fun little tidbit. Later on in Jefferson's career, after he became an ambassador to France and then eventually a senator, he discovered that postmasters were opening up his mail and reading it. So that's why he developed his ciphers, so that all the important correspondences that went to certain individuals could only be understood between him and them. Um, then later on, when he was donating his library to Congress, he wrote a letter to John Adams, telling him about it, and then confessing that he was starting to collect books again. And he said, "I cannot live without books." I agree with him there. Thomas Jefferson was also no stranger to the sufferings of authors. He experienced the sting of rejection at the hands of editors. The Declaration of Independence was edited by a committee and Congress after he finished the initial drafts, and this resulted in the cutting of almost a fourth of his content that was in that originally. Jefferson actually resented those changes, but he didn't publicly speak against them. So, very professional way of handling it, all things considered. Good example for us writers. Jefferson co-founded the National Gazette in Philadelphia in 1791, not 1971, which sought to counter the policies of the Federalist Party. The other co-authors with him were James Madison, and then a U.S. representative at the time, and Philippe Freneau, I may have not said his last name right, who was considered the poet of the American Revolution. Jefferson studied parliamentary procedure also, and law, of course, and this he did for 40 years, so that qualified him to serve as the presiding officer over that department. And in 1800, he established and assembled notes on Senate procedure as a manual of parliamentary practice. And Jefferson, another area where I can relate to him, wasn't an outstanding orator and preferred written communication over oral. He chose to remain silent whenever possible. He even started a tradition by not delivering his State of the Union address personally, but wrote those addresses and sent them to representatives to read aloud in Congress. And that actually started a tradition with presidents to afterwards until Woodrow Wilson broke it in 1913. He drafted reforms of the U.S. patent law and drastically changed the patent system. And being a strong proponent of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and states' rights over federal government control, Thomas Jefferson's writings paved the path for other writers to freely express the written word and to showcase a love of learning and sharing that knowledge through the writing. So I'd say overall that he had a very heavy influence on our literature today. And I'm grateful for that example that he set. I'm very encouraged by it. It was a fun little rabbit trail learning about Thomas Jefferson a little deeper, at least, than what I knew before. So that's what I have to share with you today.
That was great. I really like that. I was just thinking that for all of you watching this, you probably are just picking up little tidbits and things that you might not have known before. And just think on the 4th of July when you're with your family and friends, you can do, oh, did you know? And sound like the expert. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, which I practiced doing earlier. And so hopefully it's going to work still. Oh, yay, it did. Except now I've got all these buttons I don't know what to do with. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm doing Alexander Hamilton, a founding father who did not sign the Declaration of Independence. Neither did George Washington. Guys, I'm going to ask you to go off screen momentarily because I cannot see my whole screen because I'm seeing you guys too, and I'm going to do the same. I think stop my video. There, thank you. Oh, Brandy, I still see you.
Yep. Hold
Yeah,
on.
yeah. Sorry. That was there. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. So he didn't sign it, neither did George Washington, James Madison, nor the lesser known John Jay. Each one is still considered a founding father, though you won't find their John Hancock, ha ha ha, in the signature section of the Declaration of Independence. General Washington was too busy actually fighting for independence to attend the signing, though he did take time to read the Declaration of Independence to the Continental Army on July 9th. So he read the whole thing to them. Alexander Hamilton was only 19 years old, and he was Washington's aide de camp. So he may have been in that audience and heard the Declaration of Independence. He may have been 19, he may have been 21. His birthday is January 11th, but historians disagree on whether he was born in 1755 or 1757. Apparently, Hamilton himself was prone to rounding his age when asked how old he was. So it's a little bit tricky. Oh, and now it's not letting me move to another page. There we go. Um, Historical facts. Hamilton was born out of wedlock in the West Indies and orphaned in 1768. So he was still, like 11, 12 years old. He was an artillery officer in the American Revolutionary War and fought in the siege of Yorktown. He was a lawyer. He founded the Bank of New York. And as a delegate to the Philadelphia Convention, he was involved in the drafting of the U.S. Constitution. He was the first Secretary of the Treasury, and he died after being shot by Aaron Burr. So that's a photo of Aaron, well, not a photo, a portrait, a photo of a portrait of Aaron Burr in a duel. But we're not here to focus on his historic legacy, which is extensive, but his literary one. So that included anonymous pamphlets. These were some rabbit holes that my could have gone down and I didn't because it sounded very complicated. In 1774, a loyalist named Samuel Seabury, who was a Church of England clergyman, wrote pamphlets intended to scare the American colonists from rebelling against the king. And he wrote under the pseudonym of A.W. Farmer, which was an abbreviation for a Westchester farmer. In response, Hamilton anonymously published a full vindication of the measures of Congress. Seabury published another pamphlet in response to Hamilton, and then Hamilton responded with "The Farmer Refuted." And a lot of other political writings followed that one. So this is like, I guess, their way of texting, except they had to do pamphlets and have those circulated and really be out there, but it would be like one person said something and then someone would respond to it with another pamphlet. That was the way they discussed all these matters and issues. So going on with that, with more of the anonymous pamphlets, as we said, from 1777 to 1781, he was an aide de camp to Washington and very trusted. Washington considered him almost a son. They had a very, very close relationship. He handled much of the general's correspondence and eventually, though still under Washington's direction, he would issue orders that he himself would sign. In 1778, he signed at least 3 letters under the pseudonym Publius. He apparently discovered that name in a book titled Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans. The original Publius Valerius, better known as Publicola or Friend of the People, helped to found the ancient Republic of Rome. So Hamilton wrote 3 letters under this name, accusing Samuel Chase, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and represented Maryland in the 1787 Continental Congress, of using what today we might call insider knowledge to benefit from the flower market. What that was all about, I have no idea, but you can look it up if you're interested. The Reynolds pamphlet. Now, this is scandalous. Hamilton is considered by at least one historian to be like all these founding fathers are very smart, very intelligent, obviously, but considers Hamilton to be the true genius among the founding fathers. And he wrote many more articles and essays about various aspects of government and politics. In 1797, he wrote this 95 to 100-page pamphlet confessing to an affair he had had when he was Secretary of the Treasurer. So it is generally believed that Hamilton was set up by the woman who was involved and her husband, who then used that incident to blackmail him. Hamilton took responsibility for the moral lapse, but he was very concerned that people would think that he had acted without integrity as a Secretary of Treasury. And so this is why he wrote all about the details of this affair and what had happened, because he definitely wanted it known that he was very careful with the people's money and in that post. So here's another first to add to Hamilton's resume. He was the first major American politician to be involved in a sex scandal. The Federalist Papers. Hamilton is most well known for writing 51 of the 85 installments of the Federalist Papers. The remaining essays and articles were written by James Madison and John Jay, but each one appeared under the pseudonym of, again, Publius, I don't know, Publius, whichever it is, the same pen name that Hamilton used when he was writing those letters to attack Samuel Chase in 1778. So this is kind of cool. This is an image I found. And if you look at the very top, it looks like it says either for Mr. or maybe even Mrs. There could be a little S there at the after the R, but I think it's Mr. For Mr. Church from his sister, yes, it's probably Mr. Elizabeth Hamilton. So that's really cool. This is like an autographed copy of the collection of the essays, which first appeared in newspapers. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay wrote the Federalist Papers to sway public opinion to gain support for the proposed U.S. Constitution. The vast majority of the essays were published between October 1787 and August 1788 in New York newspapers and sometimes reprinted in newspapers in other states. And then this image is an advertisement that appeared for the Federalist when they put them all together in one collection. Before he wrote so much political prose, Hamilton wrote poetry. So we're going to talk a little bit about his poetic side. So here is Hamilton's query letter, which was printed along with the two poems that he submitted to the Royal Danish American Gazette, which is a newspaper in St. Croix, the Virgin Islands. He writes, I am a youth about 17, and consequently such an attempt as this must be presumptuous. But if upon perusal you think the following piece worthy of a place in your paper, by inserting it, you'll much oblige your obedient servant, A.H. And then there is a poem that he wrote. It's kind of a love poem about some girl. I don't know who, but it was really very, very sweet. And then the poem that follows, which I did not add any images of it, is about a girl who had a little bit of a wild side. So it was very interesting that these two poems, I don't know, they just show two different views of a woman that he obviously kind of respected and one that he may not have. Or I don't know, it's kind of funny. So anyway, those two poems were published on April 6th, 1771, and then two more poems and a hymn appeared within a 4-month span in the Royal Danish American Gazette, again, that same newspaper. So it's not known if Hamilton was actually in St. Croix during that winter or if he mailed those to a friend who submitted them to the Gazette. Again, they were written not under his name. The Melancholy Hour is, he uses a pseudonym Juvenis. It was published on October 11th, 1772. Ron Chernow, who wrote the biography just titled Alexander Hamilton, which was published in 2004, said this about the poem. This brooding work reprises the theme of the hurricane as heavenly retribution upon a fallen world. And here are two lines from that poem, and you do see it's brooding and very sad. Why hangs this gloomy damp upon my mind? Why heaves my bosom with the struggling sigh? The second poem, or actually was a hymn, the soul ascending into bliss in humble imitation of Pope's dying Christian to his soul. So he's referring to Alexander Pope in a completely different poem or hymn. Chernow calls this unsigned four-stanza hymn a lovely mystical meditation in which Hamilton envisions his soul soaring heavenward. And so, even though it, again, was not published under his name, both his son and his wife had copies of it and verified that it is something that he had written. And one part of the hymn is this: Hark, hark, a voice from yonder sky. Methinks I hear my Savior cry. I come, O Lord, I mount, I fly, on rapid wings I cleave the sky. And then he wrote another poem for the same newspaper published on February 3rd, 1773, and it's just as a character by A.H. So at least he gave his initials. This time, um, in this short, disillusioned work, Chernow writes, Hamilton evokes a sharp-witted fellow named Eugenio who manages inadvertently to antagonize all his friends. And the final two lines of the poem are this: Wit not well governed rankles into vice. He to his jest, his friend he will sacrifice. So this is somebody who thought more of being witty and funny over friendship. So it makes you wonder what that was all about. And then there have been other poems appearing in other publications that have also been attributed to Hamilton, but these are the ones that I wanted to share with you today. Okay, to wrap up, this is an illustration of the 1804 duel. On July 11th, Hamilton and Burr fought a duel. Hamilton missed, perhaps on purpose. He had told his second that he would shoot wide. He did not intend to hit Burr. This was kind of common in these duels where the main thing was just to have the duel, but you didn't actually kill anybody. But Burr did not miss, and the wounded Hamilton died the next day. Whether he was born in 1755 or 1757, he wasn't yet 50 years old. And just a little bit of background about this. They were in the same political party, Burr and Hamilton were, but the way they did the voting all then, it was either Jefferson or Burr would have been the next president. And as we know, it turned out to be Jefferson. And Hamilton supported Jefferson over Burr, which made Burr mad. And then Hamilton said some things, and then Burr took great offense, and he would not, he wanted an apology, and Hamilton would only go so far with an apology and no further because of his principles. So Burr just wouldn't let it go. Burr was not considered a very principled person himself. And it did seem very odd to him that Hamilton would support Jefferson. Jefferson was more, as I understand it, and just very basic states' rights, where Hamilton was actually more of a Federalist. So we honor Hamilton. In an article I found online, Brian Phillips Murphy wrote that he was first on the $5 bill, then the $2 bill, then the $20, $50, 500, 1,000. Those larger denominations were only used to move money among banks or between banks and the Federal Reserve. And since the currency was redesigned and given a standard size in 1928, he has been on the $10 bill ever since then. And of course, I could not mention the Broadway musical Hamilton, which is a reimagining. There are some historical inconsistencies in it, but it's still just, is quite the production. It was nominated for 16 Tony Awards and won 11, including Best Musical, Best Actor, Best Choreography, Best Orchestrations. And the script was based on Chernow's biography of Hamilton. And I do, of course, have sources. So, if anyone wants the slides and wants to go back and see any of these things, you can do that. And there we go. All right, now I've lost everybody. Okay, here we go.
We're here.
Yeah,
But where are you?
well, my video didn't, every time oh my gosh, God, there, every
There
time I
you
clicked
go.
it would go back to red. It would just flash back and forth. So
Nice.
anyway, there we go. That's Hamilton.
Very
Nice.
You
All right.
explain the duel, excuse me, right as Pam had asked if you knew what the
Oh,
duel was.
really?
So
Yeah.
that was perfect timing on the question and the answer.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Aaron Burr was a very scandalous individual and
He
actually
was.
thought to be a traitor at one
Hmm.
point. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, he ended up becoming Thomas Jefferson's vice president because he lost to Jefferson at that time when there were people running against one another. The one that was lost would then become the vice president of the
Yeah.
president. So, yeah. And he later lost the ticket when Jefferson went in for a second term because of all the scandal.
Yeah. He's not a nice man. All right. So who's next? Brandy?
Me.
Hey,
Yes.
yeah.
I have Abigail Adams, and I have to admit that I did not know who she was or her contribution to literacy. um, or to the literary world today. So it was quite interesting for me to read who she was, learn more about her, and really to understand what a significance she has in our literary world today. So Abigail Adams, in case you're like me, you don't know who she is. Let me just give you a little background. I'll tell you. She was born November 22nd, 1744, or if you are in the old style calendar before the Gregorian calendar came into being in 1752, it would have been November 11th, but adjusted is November 22nd. And she was born in Weymouth, Massachusetts, which actually I can drive to, which is very nice. She was the daughter of Reverend William Smith, who was a minister of the First Church. Um, Interesting note about pastors, reverends in that day. They were like the celebrity person. If somebody had a gathering, the pastor was the first one they would call. The reverend was the first one they call. If there was something, a meal, or there was some big event, they would always ask the reverend to come. First off, he would get the first seat. He would bless whatever it was. Reverends at that time were also ended up being doctors. And it was reverends that were the most educated of everybody in society, the common person, the farmer, everybody else. They didn't have the education that reverends did. And consequently, those that were in the pastorship ended up steering education at that time. So Abigail Adams came from what would have been considered a high breed, so to speak, for a woman. However, when she was in childhood, she was sick a lot of the time. So she actually did not go to school, though women at that time would typically learn to read and write, do basic math, and that would be about it. She did learn to read and write, obviously, because as she goes on, she contributes with letters. She is the second of four children. And she ended up marrying John Adams, who was the second president of the United States. She married him October 25th in 1764. She had several children. Abigail Nabby Adams in 1765. John Quincy Adams in 1767, who happened to be the sixth president of the United States. So little family thing going on there. Susanna Adams in 1768, Charles Adams in 1770, Thomas Boylston Adams in 1772, and then they had a stillborn daughter in 1777 who was Elizabeth Adams. Now, in the middle of all that, in 1773 was when the Boston Tea Party happened, just to give you a little bit of historical marker in the ground. And then her husband was named to the Declaration of Independence Committee in 1776, so he also was a signer on that. She wrote many, many letters before she died in 1818 in October, which happened to also be Quincy, Mass., another place I can drive to. She wrote more than 1,100 letters between her and her husband and some other people. They are preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society Adams Paper Collection. And you can also find a lot of them on Gutenberg. A lot of good reading, a lot of interesting things. So she wrote and began them when she was courting her husband, and it continued on through his husband's political career. She They would send stuff back and forth. He'd be away so much. You know, he was on the Continental Congress. He was on assignment in Europe. He was all over the place. So their primary way that they would connect would be letters. And in their second decade together, he was away more than he was home. So they were just writing, writing, writing. And, you know, sometimes like when he went on a diplomatic assignment to Europe, it would be more challenging because you had transatlantic mail delivery. Not so easy when, you know, a friend from this town is traveling up to Boston or whatever. So they were doing a lot of this back and forth. They wrote during his vice presidency, during his presidency. She wrote on things, her life as a woman. And that is significant because life from the point of view of a woman there's not really well documented in that time period except for her letters. There are a few things here and there. There's one woman, Martha. Oh, I cannot remember her name. I can look at a tab, but I will refrain. She wrote a letter against actually the Declaration of Independence, not wanting to see this new form of government. And she knew Abigail Adams. But Abigail wrote, you know, about her life. She wrote about war from her perspective, what she saw at home. She wrote about her children, her family. When her husband was in presidency and vice presidency, she wrote letters of prayer and would pray for him, pray for wisdom, pray that God would help him to lead this nation well. And she got involved in politics. I'll just read a little bit. This is from Britannica online, and it mentions that her critics objected that the wife of the president should not insinuate herself in political discussions. Gallatin wrote, "She is Mrs. President, not of the United States, but of a faction. It is not right." So she was vocal enough in politics and with her letters, and really just kind of speaking into her husband's ear as he did his work for a broader wisdom that what she saw was right or not right. She would share, and she would always advocate for education for women, for women's rights, maybe not so much for voting, but for the importance of women, for them to be able to speak up, for them to be able to share. She wrote on political issues. Funny, she was not a fan of Alexander Hamilton. She had written that in his eyes she saw the very devil, the viciousness itself. Kind of interesting. Her viewpoint makes you wonder what was what and who was who and how were they really, right? Let me share a few quotes from Abigail. Let's see. There are several. Short one to Abigail Adams Smith, "A lady cannot possibly be too circumspect." To her husband in 1776, "If you complain of neglect of education in sons, what shall I say with regard to daughters, who every day experience the want of it? With regard to the education of my own children, I find myself soon out of my depth, and destitute and deficient in every part of education. I most sincerely wish that some more liberal plan might be laid and executed for the benefit of the rising generation, and that our new Constitution may be distinguished for learning and virtue. If we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, we should have learned women." There was another one I thought interesting. Well, she says here, "A wife should never suffer a rival in kindness or attention." And I also want to read a little bit that's more kind of slice of life kind of thing, but more what she does with politics. "I think myself very happy." This is from May in 1777 to her husband. "I think myself very happy that not a week passes but what I receive a letter or two, sometimes more, from you, and though they are longer in coming than formerly, owing, I suppose, to the post being obliged to travel farther round. Yet I believe they all faithfully reach me. Even the curious conversation between Mr. Byrne and Your Honor arrived safe and made me laugh very heartily. I think before this time, many of our troops must have arrived at headquarters, for though we have been dilatory in this and the neighboring towns, others I hear have done their duty better. Not an hour in the day but what we see soldiers marching. The sure way to prevent their distressing us here would be to have a strong army with the general. There are a number, not more than half, I believe, though, of this town's proportion enlisted. The rest were to be drawn at our May meeting, but as nothing was done in that way, they concluded to try a little longer to enlist them. The towns send but one representative this year, and that is Mrs., and then there's a word you can't really read it, of the middle parish. Give him his pipe and let him laugh. He will not trouble anybody. So it just gives a little idea of how she writes. And I would say that is probably pretty informative to her husband to understand what's happening on every day in places where he isn't. And I also think it's really interesting that, even though she wasn't super schooled, the way she wrote is just kind of an example of a good way for us to write today. Um, Personable, me to you, easy to understand, so that anybody can take a look and learn or understand what you exactly are trying to say. Um, I just think that her contributions with so many letters is just a wealth of information. And I know that I'm probably going to take some time now to read through to understand more about that time period. And also, I'm grateful that she took the time not only to connect with her husband, which is good for marriages, right? Um, but that it sets a precedence for how women can interact, how we can be involved in our communities, um, by opening our mouth, by sharing what's important to us, by sharing what we see with others to help them understand. I think that's just as important today as it was back then. And the fact that she did that in a time when it wasn't as accepted, and it's more accepted now for women to write and to share. How good it is for us to be able to do that. And I'm grateful that she would speak up. She would say something because she took some of the brunt and the heat of um, critics just for being a woman and sharing her thoughts and her opinions. And if you go through and you read some on your own, you will find that she has a lot of wisdom. And I think that because of that and being behind her husband, by that with through her letters, she really impacted our country for the positive.
Pam was asking a question about where you could find that letter that she wrote about needing more learned women in society.
There is, let's see, where's my little linky here? I will put the link. There's a couple different places. You can search for all the letters between her and her husband on Gutenberg Press, but then there is also Abigail Adams birthplace.org.
Mm.
And if you go there, you can actually see some pictures of the house that she grew up in, and restoration that was done to that. And you can see a beautiful timeline of the events in her life intermingled with events in the country that
Oh,
happened.
cool.
It just really it grounds you in understanding all of the letters, all the context in which that she was writing by seeing that. So there's a lot of great places to go there. So that's Abigail Adams birthplace.org, Gutenberg Press. Did I get that right? Yeah. Oh, no, Gutenberg.org, Gutenberg.org. And they, a lot of different stuff there. So lots of places. Thank you, Melissa, for sticking that in the chat.
Okay, well, that was great. Thank you, Brandy, so much. Okay, Norma, your turn.
So as you can see, I'm talking about Benjamin Franklin, and he was an author, inventor, and one of our founding fathers who did also have a part in the Declaration of Independence. He is just an amazing man, but one of the reasons I really like him is because we share the same birthday, not date, but day. So I was born on his birthday, January 17th, So I think that's pretty cool. Nice to know that famous people, especially an author, was born on the same day. He was a prolific writer, an inventor, and just a great statesman. He went to England and he went to France on behalf of the United States as an ambassador, as also went back to England several times to try to get them on board and to stop being so unkind as far as fighting us in this trying to be free. One of the things most people don't know about Ben Franklin is he also had a very humorous side to him. One of the books he wrote was called Flagellate Proudly, which for those of you that don't know what flatulence is, it is gas, or as we say today, farting. And this book, this compilation, is of humorous writings and satires of Franklin's. And there's the satires are on improper manners in public, like not controlling your flatulence, adultery, and other things is talked about the wars and how men and women should behave, how children should behave. And all of these were done in a irreverent but comical way. These writings also show that he was a little bit of a rogue, and but in his personal life, he strived very hard to be very well-mannered and excuse me, just be an all-around good person. One of the things that Franklin is most known for is Poor Richard's Almanac. And even though there had been other almanacs written before this one tends to be very famous. Excuse me. He wrote this under a pseudonym of Richard Saunders. And so this became Poor Richard's Almanac. And I'm sure you can see on the front, the spelling is different than how we spell almanac today. But this was first accepted by the publishing company in 1732 and was released in 1733 and was published once a year, every year for the next 25 years. And it consisted of a calendar and weather predictions, sayings, poems, recipes, trivia. It was an amazing thing for back then. This is also which I don't know if I don't follow almanacs anymore, but this was also where he would share some of his wit was during this time. And in here, you would also find, some of his little quips and sayings like early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, and those kinds of things. So it's very interesting, the things that were in here. This almanac was also read by most by people because they didn't really quite have a library and things. Books weren't easily accessible to the average person. So he wrote his almanac to make it easy for people to be able to get this information. And Franklin considered this a vehicle of instruction for common people who could not afford books. basically he thought of it as literature for the masses. And back then, almanacs were the most read secular books in the colonies. So this was just a really neat book. And there's other things other pieces that were pulled, portions of this were pulled together to make other books. Wit and Wisdom from Poor Richard's Almanac. Here is one of those examples. This one was first published in 1732, and Franklin was just 26. Excuse me, when this came out, when he first published the almanac, and this came from that. Wit and Wisdom has approximately, his almanac had approximately 30 different categories, as we can see here. And Wit and Wisdom was full of familiar phrases like I talked about earlier. Haste makes waste. He that lies down with dogs shall rise up with fleas. I thought that one was pretty entertaining. But it also had wisdom about finances and things that were going on to help people understand or handle their finances and business and married life and different things and what was expected of men and women in that time. The next book that came out of Poor Richard's Almanac was The Way to Wealth. Franklin was a very well-off man, a lot from his inventions, and he was also very frugal. So a lot of his in Wisdom and Way to Wealth, he talked quite a bit about how to be frugal, basically talking about living on a budget before a budget was really the word that was thrown around. But in this book, The Way to Wealth, it was entertaining about earning and saving money and debt, how to use it properly and not let it be too big. And this particular book was originally published in 1758 as the preface to Poor Richard's Almanac, which seems weird, but just like sometimes now we publish books and then after the books are published, the prequel will come out. Well, this happened pretty much the same way. And it's been through innumerable printings. It has sold millions and millions of copies. Just something a little bit more about Ben Franklin's writings. Then there's the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, and this had so much amazing information about him that I could talk like for hours. But it starts out as I would imagine many autobiographies do, with where he grew up and what life was like during that time. But he did this, in this autobiography was written in several stages. And by the time he died in 1790, it still was not published. It hadn't been put together enough to be sent to publishing. So I don't know if it was his wife or somebody else had put it together. But in this, he talks about he founded some institutions like the Library Company of Philadelphia and the University of Pennsylvania. Didn't know that. Innovations such as the Franklin stove. And of course, we know he advanced electrical science. And many of us can imagine when we think of Ben Franklin, the pictures of him holding a kite with a key on it in a thunderstorm. His writings reflect a pragmatic approach to life, where doing good serves the community and aligns with his beliefs in individualism and self-sufficiency. A legacy, this book is a legacy that resonates with the ideals of the American dream for people to come here and find their place. He helped draft the Declaration of Independence and was involved in negotiating the peace treaty with Britain that ended the Revolutionary War. He also invented bifocals and a stove that is still manufactured today, a water harmonica, and the lightning rod. His extraordinary range of interests accomplished from his accomplishments are all recorded here in this brilliantly published, compiled book of his autobiography, considered one of the classics. And he also, as a boy, Franklin was an apprentice to his brother, who was a printer. In his autobiography, Franklin talks about his journey from his modest upbringing in Boston to becoming part of the Continental Congress and a very influential figure in Philadelphia. His writings some are known. He also did a lot of letters to the editors and things like that. And to wrap up, Disney did a really cute take on Ben Franklin and a little bit of his writing and his inventions on this little cartoon called Ben and Me. I have several of the sources from where all this information came. If anybody needs it, let me know. But the almanac his biography was considered one of the first books of American literature. So that was interesting. And that's my story of Benjamin Franklin and what he contributed. He was a prolific author, wrote to newspapers, wrote several books. There was even a book of him called The Hatmaker's Sign. And it was a story of the young Benjamin Franklin encouraging a hat maker to not be so hung up on perfectionism. And it was a cute little story. It's called The Hatmaker's Sign. It was really fun researching Ben Franklin. He was an amazing man. Some thought him to be a savant, but he was too social to be a true savant. Most people that are savants are very gifted in an area, but often lack social skills or very lacking in other areas. Ben Franklin was a very well-rounded man, figuratively and literally, they say. And just a neat guy, just had his hands in so many things that it would take hours and hours and hours to even just highlight so many of the things he was involved in, and even his writings. There was just so much out there. And I just, due to the struggle with sharing my screen and time, I narrowed everything down pretty quick. And sorry for jumping around a little bit. I was a little rattled by not making things work smoothly. That perfectionism thing was kicking it.
It happens. So we all
But it was fun.
understand
It was fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, ladies. This was really fun. I hope that those of you who are watching enjoy it too and learn a little bit more about, these men that, we do tend at times just revere them and forget that they were actually people too. And they had their own troubles. As we were talking in the chat, many of the founders or the signers of the Declaration of Independence went bankrupt. They lost property because of what they'd done. It was considered treasonous, by the British. Uh, And, maybe rightly so from their perspective, not from ours, maybe, but from theirs. So, yeah, but they struggled with things just like we do and so on. And yet, and this is going back a little bit to what we are talking about, Aaron Burr. It does seem in the things, the podcasts I've listened to and things I've read, that men like Washington and oh, who else was I just thinking of? Jefferson and Hamilton were they really cared. They didn't agree always on what it was, but they did care about the country and they cared about setting things up and they really cared about what they were doing, even if they cared more about that than their personal gain from it. And Burr was not that way. So just one more little thing about him. It's like they felt Hamilton especially felt that Burr was in it for himself, that he didn't care so much about the country. He just wanted the power and the prestige of being president. So even though they were the same party, even though he and Jefferson were often at odds with one another, he supported Jefferson instead. So, okay, any last words? Any
I
final?
think it's neat that all of them had, they pursued, they wanted for this country to have the freedom of speech, which they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have in England. And they also wanted the freedom of religion. They
Mm,
didn't want the government to dictate how to worship.
yeah.
And that's where, unfortunately, I think a lot of people, that whole separation of church and state gets to be a real hotbed of
Mm-hmm.
emotions and everything. But
or
it was,
even had a right.
yeah. And these men, whether they went, I don't know how, it doesn't sound like very many of them went to school, like higher education,
Mm,
but they all were well written. They were succinct in what they had to say. And they really just had a huge impact in freedoms that we still enjoy today
absolutely.
and living the American dream.
Yeah. And we didn't do George Washington, but again, I've been listening to American Revolutionary podcasts, so I've been, hearing some of these things. And so just it- it- there are coincidences in his life. Um, like he was uh around people, what's that called? He was with people who had smallpox, or he had a small case of it or something. Was it smallpox or yellow fever? Something, but he was around it and was immune to it. Then later, when this whole wave went through his camp, and he didn't die from it because he had been exposed. That's the word I was looking for, exposed to it as a child. And it's just like, and then there's just other things like when you hear his story, it's like it just seems like God's hand was on him again and again and again, despite a lot of sorrow, losing a father, losing his older brother who he adored, and and they feel like that's why he kind of took Hamilton under his wing. So even his story, and there was a plot to assassinate him. I mean, and if that had worked, our history would be all so different. So, yeah, if you're wanting to dig into the history over this next 12 months, going up into the 250th birthday, start reading about some of these guys and ladies. Don't want to forget the women, because there are women who played very significant roles in the history too. So, okay, well, we are kind of over time, but this has been so much fun. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, for everybody's listening, whether you're here again or watching the replay. Next week, we will have Tracy Crump with us. Tracy has been with us before. She's going to be doing an episode called The Kaleidoscope of Nonfiction Opportunities, and just talking about it's not just books and articles, there are other things out there that you can do. So we'll be very glad to have Tracy back for that episode. And I'll see you all next week. We're here every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock Central, 11 o'clock Eastern. I'm not in my own time zone right now, so I have to really think about it. And of course, as always, we do invite you to check out our episodes that we've done in the past. And you can find a lot of those on our YouTube channel, Writers Chat YouTube channel, and on our Writers Chat Facebook page. So I'm going to leave it at that and see you all next week. Stay around for the after party, those of you who are here. Thanks, everybody.